welcome to Pillar 3, Digital Leadership and Strategy. So we're going to be looking at who drives the digital bus. And this is going to be your guide to digital strategy. Now I want you to picture a scenario. You've been given a new directive. The strategy from the top says we need to achieve seamless interoperability by Q4. Sounds very ambitious, but when you're sitting down in meetings like that or you hear directive like that, you can't help but ask yourself, okay, so how are we going to do it? Now, how does a boardroom ambition become a workflow that doesn't make clinical people quit their jobs? There's a huge gap between leaders who draw the map and teams who build the road. And today we're going to be looking at who does what and how a good strategy actually comes to life. Now, when you think of digital leadership, think of it like constructing a new hospital wing. And we have two groups that do that. So first we have the executive architects. So this is the top of the line, our CDIOs, CCIOs, CNIOs. And their job is to look at the whole landscape and decide, what do we need to build? Now, take for example, we need to build a dedicated wing for cardiology. It must be sustainable, patient-centered, and equipped for the next 20 years. Now, that is the strategy. Then you have the project builders. So this is where we have the digital transformation, project managers, program managers. Now, their job is to take that blueprint and figure out how we're going to achieve strategy. So how do we pour the foundation without disrupting A&E? How do we order the materials? How do we motivate the electricians? They're the ones that actually interpret the grand vision and turn it into daily task lists. Now, without the architect, you build something chaotic, and without the builders, you just have a very nice looking project plan or diagram. Now, let's look at the blueprints that they'll be working from. So the master plan often in digital health is, take for example, in the United Kingdom, we look at the NHS long-term plan and digital frameworks. That is the master plan that guides every digital health transformation or innovation. Now, for the executive architects, their world is defined by these two high-level documents. So the NHS long-term plan to a senior leader is not just a document, it's a contract that they have with the public. Take for example, we would use technology to shift care closer to home. So when a CDIO reads that, what they're thinking of means, I need to reallocate my capital budget away from bedside monitors and towards remote monitoring. So you see that shift. So they're not just reading the strategy, they're looking for how they can interpret that strategy and communicate that clearly. Now there's the digital framework. So let me go back a bit. There's the digital framework. Now this is technical rule books that guide how digital strategy should be implemented. So in the case of, let's say, CCIO, when they read a sentence like digitally enabled care will go mainstream, they're not just thinking about a single app. They're thinking about the infrastructure required to support the 10,000 virtual ward beds at the same time. When they read the term interoperability, they are going to imagine or think about negotiating with suppliers or other trust leaders to ensure that the data across organizational boundaries are playing the long-term game, so they can both assess their data however it comes. Now, in terms of interpreting strategy, the roles you have within this are the digital transformation director, program manager, project manager, and the likes. There's also business analyst, change manager, and all those type of roles. That's what you will find within the pillar 3 of digital leadership and strategy. Now, the digital transformation director and the delivery manager in some cases the critical link between what we're doing and how we're going to do it. Now, when a senior leader says we need to be digitally ready for winter, that's a strategic goal. So the implementer's task is to ask how are we going to do it and how are we ready. So what does ready actually mean? Actually means, take for example, onboarding 2,000 patients in remote monitoring platforms by October, because it's almost time for winter. Training 50,000 nurses on a new triage protocol so that they can manage the pressure. Integrating data feeds so that it appears in core clinical records. Now, the role of a project manager in all of this is they take that interpretation and build the scaffolding. So they create the timeline, they manage the risk, they're the ones that sit in the room with the nurses and actually hear things like, oh, the login process is not working. And they now have to go back to the suppliers and say, okay, the strategy fails, we need to fix this. Scratch all of that. So interpreting the strategy, now this is where the implementers have a dilemma. They already have the strategy from, remember, they have it from the executive architects, and they are meant to implement the strategy. So the roles you find within this pillar as a whole, digital leadership and strategy, digital transformation director, program manager, project manager. There's also business analyst, change analyst, scrum master, delivery manager, and roles like that. So their job is to say, okay, we have this strategy. How are we going to implement it? Now I'm going to use an example. So let's say the strategy at that point, or the strategic goal for that point is be digitally ready for winter pressures. That is the strategy, right? Now, what does the implementer do about that strategy? So what that means to the implementer and what they actually do is, take for example, they are trying to manage winter pressures digitally. So it will probably look like onboarding 200 patients on a remote monitoring platform by October, because remember, winter pressures. Training 50 nurses on a new triage protocol because we're going to have more pressures. We need to triage better. And again, integrating the data feed so that it appears on the core clinical record. That is what it means to the implementer. That is the job of the implementer. You take a strategy goal and implement how it's going to actually look like. Now, feeding back up the chain is actually informing strategy. So let's say you're not a CDIO, you're not a CNIO, you're not a project manager, you're just on the ward, you're on the front lines. You are not left out of the pillar 3 of digital leadership and strategy. So when you're using a system and system doesn't make sense or is hard or is not working, I need you to stop saying, oh, this system is rubbish, and leave it at that. You need to start looking at it differently and feedback differently. So start saying things like, to complete a discharge summary, I have to click through 7 screens, and this adds 5 minutes per patient. You see how you've given it is a more data driven complaint. It's a more data driven statement as opposed to saying the system is rubbish. Now that is the data point to a project manager. That's going to help the implementers. That's going to also help the architects understand the issues and communicate that and make sure the strategy is done properly. Now, in conclusion, the whole ecosystem of delivery is the senior leaders, they're looking at the stars. They don't really understand frontline to an extent. So the traffic reports, the map, plotting the routes of how it would be better, that is what they are concerned about. They are the navigators. They are the ones that are saying, this is our destination, this is where we need to get to. Now, the implementers, these are the digital directors, project managers, they are the engineers. They are like the engines of digital health when it comes to digital leadership and strategy. So They power through the potholes, daily realities. They talk to the frontline people to understand the pain points, and they make sure that the boss of digital health actually gets on the road and keeps driving on the road. And the clinical staff, or the people that are actually using the system or the strategy is being implemented with, are the feedback sensors. They feel every bump and they complain and say, oh, it's bumpy here, it's bumpy there. Let's pull a different route. So that's how it all comes together for digital leadership and strategy. So I hope that's clear. Now, thank you again for coming to the end of Pillar 3. I'll see you again in Pillar 4. And remember, get educated and stay educated.